Okay, we're going to get started. I want to welcome all of you to session number 20, Gainful Employment, overview of 2019 and beyond. My name is Greg Martin. I'm a policy analyst with the Office of Post-Secondary Education out of Washington, D.C. Joining me today is Cynthia Hammond, and she is a director over at Policy Liaison.
Assistant Director of Policy Liaison and Implementation.
There we go. I knew that. Assistant Director. I said she was the director, so I gave her a promotion. Okay. So, two of us today are going to be presenting this overview of gainful employment, and looking forward, we are going to review some things about gainful employment the way it currently exists, because we still have the current regulations. We hope to have time to answer some of your questions as we go through this. So keep that in mind as we go through, and at the end we'll open it up for you to come up to the microphones and ask any questions you may have. Let's talk about our agenda, and you can see here that we're going to look at the negotiated rulemaking and the upcoming final rule, and we're going to talk about the current process: reporting, disclosures, alternate earnings appeals, certifications, and debt to earnings rates. We've had a lot of activity recently on the gainful employment front. Lawsuits, we have draft completers lists to talk about, notices of proposed rulemaking, and the result of all this, I think, has led to some degree of confusion out there as to, where are we going, where have we been? Hopefully we know that. What are we supposed to be doing right now? I think that's what a lot of schools are worried about. What am I supposed to be doing right now in the immediate future? And Cynthia has those answers for you, as one of her portion of the presentation. So you can wait patiently for that. First, let's, as a review, just talk about what is a GE program. And I'll always like to point out that, when we talk about what a GE program is, this is absent. Even if we had never had any regulations pertinent to GE, to doing debt to earnings rates or anything, we'd still have to deal with this definition of what is a GE program and when you require what are the requirements for a GE program. So we should take a look at that. The Higher Education Act of 1965 defines which programs are eligible for Title IV funds. And so we know that to be eligible for Title IV funds, the program must be long enough and be covered by your state and accreditation agency. In addition, Title IV funds can only go to students who are enrolled in a degree-seeking program, as a degree-seeking student in an eligible degree program at a public or nonprofit institution. Or to students enrolled in a program at any type of institution if that program prepares students for employment in a recognized occupation. So let's take a look at the slide here. We just talked about the Higher Education Act of 1965. And this blue area over here, I think it's blue, I'm colorblind, so it could be green, blue, turquoise, blue, or something. Anyway, generally all non-degree programs must lead to gainful employment. Generally, most programs at for-profit institutions must lead to gainful employment. So there are some exceptions. This is the rule. So at a for-profit school, in most cases, all of your programs are going to be programs which must lead to gainful employment, and that would be the case whether or not we had GE regulations. That was always the case. And so at other types of schools, not-for-profit, privates, and at publics, those programs which are not degree-granting programs must also lead to gainful employment. And we've always had those issues in the past with schools sometimes coming up with, I'll never forget when I dealt with in Region 3, the school had a private, not-for-profit school that had certificates in the Celtic experience. And while I've got nothing against the Celtic experience or any other experience for that matter, we asked the question, what type of gainful employment does this program lead to? And I think I shouldn't have said this, but I said, unless you're going to be in river dance or something, I don't know, I'm not quite sure what that is, right? So, that's just something to consider when you have programs like that. It might be a popular program to have these types of programs, the Celtic or Slavic experience or whatever. It brings people in who have an interest in those things. But again, those are not degree programs. Must lead to gainful employment. Usually at for-profit institutions, not a problem. At those schools, I think you all know that your programs are gainful employment programs. Talk a little bit about what are some of our recent developments are. So we talk about negotiated rulemaking, which we had we covered over 3 sessions, rather. So we had one in December, second one in February, and a third one in March of 2018. I'll never forget those sessions. It was quite nasty, the one in March. It was a winter that would never end, and I was going down to D.C. to do those sessions, so they're stuck in my mind forever. We did issue a notice of proposed rulemaking that we published in the Federal Register on August 14 of 2018. We had a comment period that was closed on September 13, 2018. We did receive quite a few comments. We are now in the process of reviewing those comments. As it says here on this slide, we are reviewing the submitted comments. The publication of a final rule. We should talk about that. In order for a final rule to take effect next July 1, we would have had to have met the calendar deadline date of November 1. So we would have had to have it out by November 1 of this year. Obviously, we did not meet that deadline. So the earliest that any rule could be effective would be July 1, 2020. We are working on preparing the final rule. We have reviewed all the comments. So we hope to have the final rule out. We had planned or hoped to have it out by the end of the year. I don't know if that will happen, but it will be sometime in that time frame. But the important bullet here is the last one. Until you have final rules, or until final rules take effect, so they'll be published, but remember, they will not take effect. They will not take effect next July, so it's kind of unusual, because usually we do make November 1, so it's going to be July 1 of 2020. Seems like a date out of science fiction, but it will be 2020, and until those rules take effect, not just are published, take effect, the current GE rule remains in place. So Cynthia's going to come up and give you some details on where we are and where we're headed.
Thanks, Greg. I shouldn't touch that. And I appreciate the promotion. That was very nice.
Anytime.
I actually was acting director for a short period of time, so maybe that's what you're remembering. But yeah, I joke that this is my good news conference, so maybe that's just another addition to the good news. Because I've been able to deliver good news to folks several times, and hopefully I will be doing that for y'all in just a few slides. But first I'm going to talk about GE reporting, because this is one of the things that Greg mentioned. We have to continue with the current regulations until such time as any new regulations we have take effect. So for the current regulations, one of the things that you have to do is reporting. And schools report information on all Title IV students who are enrolled in GE programs. You've already done it since the 2008-09 award year. So that part's done. For programs with medical or dental residencies, you reported Title IV students from the 7-8 award year going forward. And I will note that those are not things like medical technician programs. They're actually MD, DDS, and those programs would only be a gainful employment program at a proprietary school. So those schools know who they are. So if you have a medical technician program or some other medical related, that's not what they're referring to here. The rule says that after the initial reporting was out of the way, they had to do 4 or 5 years worth of data, that the deadline is October 1st of following the award year. So the 17-18 reporting was due October 1st, 2018. Next year, the reporting will be due October 1st, 2019. And hopefully we'll have new rules in effect, and maybe you won't, maybe you will, maybe you won't have to do GE. I can't tell you what's going to be in the new final rule. But one thing I think, I'm not sure Greg mentioned, is that our proposed rule on this actually rescinds the gainful employment regulations entirely. See, I get to deliver the good news. So, but that's just a proposed reg. It's not in effect. It doesn't. We're not sure if there'll be any changes to it at this point between now and the time we do the final rule. So hold tight on that. But that was what our proposal was. So back to GE reporting. If you find any errors in your reporting, either the stuff you just finished doing at the beginning of October or any of your reporting that you do next year, please correct those promptly. It saves you a lot of time and effort down the road. to just go ahead and fix things now instead of waiting for any other lists to be done. Reported items have not changed since last year. Same format. It includes student identifiers, program identifiers, dates of enrollment, private loans, institutional debt. There's really no changes from last year. So here are some resources on gainful employment. And this is specifically on reporting to NSLDS. There's the help desk, email, and phone number, the user guide. As you can see on the picture on the slide, it's March 2018. It was last updated, but we made a few little clarifications and stuff, but we really didn't change much. It's nothing related to, if you already had it set up in your system, there's nothing that materially changed that you'd have to go back and change. We just clarified some things, made some explanations easier, and updated our screenshots. So now I'm going to talk about the gainful employment disclosures. Oh, let me do one more thing let me go back to reporting for one more thing. So the other reason you want to make sure you correct any errors that might be wrong is this data that you report to the department. First of all, you're reporting data to a federal agency, it should be correct. But also it gets used for other things other than just gainful. We have a lot of data in NSLDS. It gets used for other types of metrics. Could be for scorecard, could be for other things. It's just important that whatever data that's provided to the department be correct. So, disclosures. The current regulations requires disclosures, as most of y'all know. You're required to have the GE disclosure on your program website. It was due April 6th of 2018, so the one you have on your website now is currently okay. The only reason you would need to use our current GE disclosure template now to update what you have on there is if you discovered you missed a program maybe, or you have a new program where there was some significant changes. Let's say you started a new program, or there was significant changes to one of your current programs and the data that you have on your current website isn't accurate anymore. So then you'd want to go back and using our current disclosure template, go ahead and update it. We're happy to have you update this data at any time, but you should know that you only have to update it annually unless there's a significant change. So if something changed, but it was just a little bit, you don't think it's that consequential for your students, then you need to update annually. Otherwise, go ahead and update it when that change happens. And I'll note that the disclosure template doesn't actually save any information whatsoever. So if you do go in and have to update one, you have to start over from scratch and enter all the information by hand again, because there is no, the system doesn't save anything. It just creates that output document. But as we have done every year since 2010, we will be having a new GE disclosure template in 2019. So we think that this new disclosure template that we've come up for this coming year is going to be both simpler for you to fill out and also simpler for students to take in the information that they're receiving. The current disclosure template, we did some consumer testing and we tried to make it something that students could easily understand and get, good data for, but like all things, sometimes they just get overwhelmed by the amount of data. So we've simplified it so there's less on there so that they can do it. So they can kind of take it in better. So the 2019 disclosure template is currently open for public comment. It's in a draft form and comments are due January 7th. Once that process is complete, we will announce the final items that will be on the template and the deadline by which that template, the revised new 2019 template, has to be posted on your website. So the new template is going to be a lot different from our current one. There's going to be no output document. It doesn't generate the HTML code for you. This is something that you're going to have to get your IT folks at your university to take care of, or post it as a PDF, or post it as a Word document, or whatever it is that you do to put it on your program homepage. But that's something that the website folks at your school, the IT folks, are going to have to do with. We're not going to generate a HTML document. We think giving schools these formatting options will make it a lot easier and simpler for y'all. It'll also allow schools to blend the content more in with their design of their webpage. I know under the current template, we told you can't change the colors, you can't change the look, you can't change anything about it. And a lot of schools are like, yeah, but everywhere else on my website, it's in, my school colors, it's in the blue and gold, it's in the, whatever your school colors are. And then you have this one other page. So this way you'll be able to blend it in and it'll actually look like it's one of your school pages. The other thing that it will do is allow you to meet any accessibility requirements in your states. So the current template is accessible. It met all the federal requirements at the time we posted it. Our understanding is that those have changed slightly. There are states that have different requirements for accessibility and screen reader access and other things. So the new template, because there isn't any HTML code, it just says these are the items, put them on your website, won't have any of those issues. So, you guys can meet whatever the standards are for your school, for your state. However, the information still has to be posted on your program website, and it still has to be easy for students to find, easy for them to see, easy for them to understand, so no tiny print. So these are the items that will be on the 2019 disclosure template. We believe it's in draft form right now, but barring a lot of comments back on one of these items, or we really think we should add something, barring a lot of comments, this is what's going to be on the GE disclosure template for 2019. All of these items, you will note, are also on the current template, so there's nothing new here. There's the institutional program name. It's what you call the program, not necessarily the zip code name for the program, but what you actually call the program at your school. And if you have a program website, you already have the name of the program on there, so check one off. You got it done already. Normal time to complete. This is as published in your catalog and reported to NSLDS. It should be the same. It does have to be in weeks, months, or years, whatever is appropriate considering the length of your program. We do ask that this be in calendar time, and it's the normal time to complete the program. This does not mean how long it takes students at your school to complete the program. This is how long the program is designed to take. So I had a community college talk to me about it. It's like, well, our associate's degree, and no, I guess it wasn't. It would have had to have been a for-profit because it was an associate's degree. There's like our associate's degree, but students really don't complete in 2 years. So can we put 2.5? I was like, it's a 2-year program. The fact that you have some students that don't complete in that amount of time, yeah, the students have lives. They don't all go full time, but it's still what it's designed to be. And this is more, y'all know, associate's degree is 2-year, bachelor's degree is 4-year. This is more how long the certificates take. So you don't have to do a lot of research on how long it actually takes students to finish this program. What you want to do is figure out how long the program was designed for a full-time student to complete it. Now, I will say if your graduation rates are low, you might want to talk to your faculty and think about that some more and think, how long is this more realistic? Is it better as a part-time program? But for our purposes, it's the time you already have listed in your catalog, the time you're already reporting to NSLDS, the length of the time you're already reporting to COD. It's all consistent. Cost of the program. This is the cost if you complete it in normal time. This is not one term's cost, one semester, one credit hour. This is the total length of the program and what the cost would be to complete the entire program. And then state licensure information. This is the same as what y'all are doing now. You tell students the program meets the licensure requirement for the metropolitan statistical area that the school's located in and any other states that you may know of. So for example, let's say it's a cosmetology school in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., the metropolitan statistical area includes Virginia and Maryland, so you'd have to tell students, yes, completion of my program, you can get certified to be a cosmetologist in DC and in Maryland, but not in Virginia. And you just have to provide them this information. You're required to know it for all the states in your metropolitan statistical area. If you happen to know other ones, you should go ahead and let students know. It does, it doesn't, whatever it might be, but you're only required to have the ones for the metropolitan statistical area. And we find that information really helpful for students making decisions about where they want to go. They won't like get halfway through or finish the program and then say, oh wait, I thought I could do this, and I actually live in Maryland and I'm just commuting to this school in DC, and I didn't realize that I couldn't move to Virginia next year or do whatever, or work in Virginia. I have to remember to take a job in only these couple states. So we find, providing the additional information for your students so they know ahead of time. But again, this is no different than what you're doing for the GE template now. The other one is the link to the college scorecard. This is just the URL for the college scorecard. It needs to be somewhere on your program page for all your GE programs. And the final one is warning language. So the regulation says that if your gainful employment failed or is in danger of losing eligibility in the next year, that you have to provide warning language to students. And the warning language is stated on there. So if your program, we've only done one round of rates so far, so if your program failed the debt to earnings rate and either did not appeal or heard back on your appeal that it was denied or abandoned the appeal, if you did any of those things, then your rate is final and you need to provide student warnings. So if your appeal is still under review, then you hold off on the warnings for now. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the appeals section, but for now, let's stick with disclosures. So I mentioned that current regulations require disclosures, but there were a couple provisions of the regulation that were delayed. Those two provisions, and they were delayed until July 1st, 2019. These are the requirements that the disclosure items be included in any promotional materials about that program, and the requirement that the disclosure template be directly distributed to prospective students. Now, it has to be directly distributed to prospective students before he or she signs an enrollment agreement, completes registration, or before he makes any financial commitment to the school. So before the student does any of those three things, you have to provide them a copy of the GE disclosures. But I'll say again, this doesn't go into effect until July 1st, 2019, so you have a little bit of time before those have to be implemented. But I would like to give folks a few tips about how to implement them once we do get there. Again, don't worry about this until July of 2019, but once we get there, you need to include the disclosure template information or a link to it in any marketing materials specifically related to the program. So if you have an ad that says, come to UVA, you don't need to include disclosures for all your programs in that. If you have an ad that says, come to UVA and enroll in our welding certificate, that one would need to have the disclosures in it because it's talking about a specific program. So you would either need to have the disclosures on that ad or a link to the disclosures, and it needs to tell them what it is that would happen when they follow the link. In addition, the current regulation says that the direct distribution of the disclosure information can only be done in person or is the only substantive comment of an email. The prospective student has to acknowledge the receipt of the information, and you have to maintain a record of that written confirmation that they received that email. And I know this is not a popular one, but you have to, the student can't just click to acknowledge it as part of the registration system. I know a lot of schools have been trying to, fold it into where they click to acknowledge. Unfortunately, you can't do that. The regulation says it has to be in person, or the paper copy has to be delivered to them. It can be the only, attached PDF is the only substantive comment only substantive content of the email. But You can't just have them something they click through. It's kind of, think of it this way. How many of you actually read your new iPhone agreement when you updated? Yeah, no hands are coming up. Neither did I. And now I don't have a copy of that. So unfortunately, you can't just click through. You have to actually have something that the student can either read at that time or go back and read later. But remember, this does not kick in until July of 2019. And we have delayed this requirement in the past. I'm not saying we will delay the requirement in the future, but it has been delayed before. So, maybe. Who knows? So here are some resources for the 2018 GE disclosures. It's available on our Office of Post-Secondary Education website. There's the link to the disclosure itself, and this is a picture of what the very first page looks like. The very first thing you do is put in your OPE ID. And then there's also a quick start guide on there. Once we have the 2019 disclosures approved, they've gone through public comment, and our Office of Management Budget has approved it and all that good stuff, and there'll be additional resources, probably on the same page that these are on now. There'll be an electronic announcement explaining how to fill it out and what information, and then you'll see that. But again, it's not going to be a cool little app like we have here for our current disclosure template. It's going to be, these are the things you must put on your website. And then you guys need to put it on your website in however manner works for your school. So next item to talk about is certifications. Certifications are also still a requirement for the current gainful employment regulations. Your institution certification will automatically be renewed when you do a program participation agreement. And I'm sorry, one thing, ma'am, the woman who's taking pictures, can you turn the flash off? Because that's distracting me every time the flash goes. I'm sorry. And I apologize. I know this presentation wasn't put on the website ahead of time. I'm sorry about that. With all of our great late-breaking news on the disclosures and what might be on there, it was late getting submitted, it was late getting approved, and therefore it didn't get posted. But it will be posted on the website. They had hoped to try to post them during the week, but I think we've had some technical issues, but they will absolutely be posted by next week. So they'll put this one back on. So certifications. Like I was saying, you automatically have to, it'll automatically get renewed if you have to do a new PPA. Institutions should make sure that the list of programs on their e-CAR is accurate and complete. All your gainful employment programs must be listed on your e-CAR. And that is a requirement, as Greg said, that's in a different part of the regulations. That's not going to change. So that's when we say we're proposing to rescind the gainful employment regulation. It has to do more with the stuff we're talking about in this presentation and the disclosures and the certifications and the reporting and the debt to earnings metrics. Your program still have to lead, any certificate program still has to lead to gainful employment and recognized occupation. You still have to report it to us on your e-CAR. So make sure that list is accurate and complete. If you add a new program or make some other change that does not require that you sign a new program participation agreement, you complete the certification by updating the e-app and adding the certification language to question 69, or you can print out the language and have your president or CEO sign it and mail it in. So the exact language in the attachment to Gainful Employment Electronic Announcement number 77, but I'm going to also go over it for you in the next few slides. The president or CEO of your institution certifies the following: that the program is approved by your accreditor and by your state, that it's programmatically accredited if that is required by either the state or a federal entity. So an example of a federal entity is the Federal Aviation Administration requires that all flight schools be programmatically accredited. So that'd be an example of one that would have to have programmatic accreditation. Some states might, for like radiology, might have a programmatic accreditation requirement, but if your state doesn't have to have it, then You just certify that it is programmatically accredited if the state or federal entity requires it. So third, that the program meets the applicable educational prerequisites for professional licensure or certification requirements in the state. So this is in the state in which the school is located. If you have a program that's, let's say, a cosmetology certificate, then it has to meet the requirements of that state for someone to be licensed in cosmetology. It can't be too short or, I don't know, or not have whatever the specific health classes or whatever it is that the state requires. It has to meet those requirements. Now, if it's a program where your state doesn't have any requirements, there isn't it leads to gainful employment, but not a state licensure sort of thing, then that's fine. You just certify that it meets the requirements or there are no requirements, and you move on. And then fourth, that the program is not substantially similar to a program that lost eligibility or was discontinued because its debt to earnings rates were failing or in the zone. Substantially dissimilar is defined as having the same 4 digits of the zip code. Now, there haven't been any programs that have lost eligibility yet, but it's possible that you've had some that you voluntarily discontinued because you saw the draft debt to earnings rate or you saw the final debt to earnings rates and decided to shut those down. So you wouldn't be able to start a new program that's substantially similar to that program. So these certifications, again, are renewed automatically when you recertify. You also have to do them when you add a new program or if something materially changes. For instance, gosh, I guess it was like 4 or 5 years ago now, Pennsylvania changed its requirements for radiology schools. And so all the schools that offered a radiology program in Pennsylvania had to go back and redo their certifications that said, yes, we now meet the new requirements that the state has created because they were significantly different. So if you need help with your gainful employment certifications, the best place that you can call is your school participation team. So the picture has the states and the phone numbers and which states are for which region, but the easiest thing to do is go to the elgcert.ed.gov, and that same thing is there, and a lot of you probably already know who's in your region, who it is that you talk to about stuff regularly from our wonderful program compliance team, and they can also help you with the certification stuff. So, moving on to alternative earnings appeals. So after the final debt to earnings rates were released back in January of 17, schools had the option of doing an alternative earnings appeal. This is where you guys tried to prove that the mean or median earnings that we got from the Social Security Administration was not an accurate reflection of your graduates' earnings. There are 2 ways to do this, either through a survey of the same graduates that were in your debt to earnings calculation, or through a state-sponsored data system where you would send them the names of those graduates and they sent you back the mean or median earnings. So the alternate earnings appeals were delayed several times. There were lawsuits, and we delayed the deadline a couple of times to accommodate that and put out some new guidance, but all appeals were due February 1st of 2018. We are in the process of renewing those now. Some results have already been posted on the FSA Data Center, and what's the spreadsheet that's on there now shows that there were 66 appeals that were reviewed and approved. There are others, some for the same schools, because we didn't lump them together by school necessarily. So there are others that are still under review. This is a very time-intensive process, both for us as well as for the schools. And the schools were not entirely consistent about what was submitted as part of the appeal. So because we got all sorts of information in a whole variety of different formats, it's taking us a bit of time to review them. We've had to go back to some schools and ask them some questions to get some clarifications. But we are continuing to review them and either approve or deny the appeals. We hope to have another spreadsheet out this winter. I'm not sure exactly when, but we have finished another batch and hope to get some more out. And as I mentioned at a meeting yesterday, there's big stacks on my desk, and I apologize, you don't know yet, but it's a lot. It's a lot of work, and Federal Student Aid is dealing with our own resource issues, and I've been working with Greg on the reviewing those 14,000 comments that or is it 13,000? All the comments that we get on the new GE regulation, and working on regulation stuff as well, and so it's not out yet. But I think it's also important to know what to do if you did submit a gainful employment appeal. So if the appeal was accepted, then the program's new best rate is the program's overall rate. So one of the things that the appeal had to move you up from either a zone to a pass, or from a fail to a zone or a pass. It couldn't just move a little bit, it had to move up a category. And so now the program's new rate is whatever the new rate is, your overall best score. If the appeal was denied, then the program's existing best rate remains their overall rate. So it's still either a zone or a fail. If that rate is a fail, then the student warnings must be distributed, and warning language must be used on the GE disclosure template within 30 days of receiving the department's determination. If the appeal is still pending, which a lot of them are, I admit, student warning requirements are on hold while the appeal is under consideration. So the school does not need to distribute student warnings for the program or include warning language on the program's template at this time. I will also note that if you are in the zone, either currently or as a result of the appeal, you do not need to do warning language. The only time you do warning language is if your program failed the GE metric. So now I am going to turn this over to Greg to talk a little more about the debt to earnings metrics themselves.
Thank you, Cynthia. We're going to talk about the actual calculation of the rates. And I guess the good news with this is if it's one of those things where, unlike what Cynthia was talking about, you do need to understand those things because the reporting, all those things, disclosures, appeals have to be done correctly. The actual calculation we do. So as long as the information in is correct, whether or not you understand how it's done would probably make very little difference. It's like you could ask somebody, how do you get a campus-based allocation every year for FSAOG or FWS? How is that calculated? Whether or not you know it by heart or don't know it at all makes no difference. But we are going to go through how this is calculated briefly, not spend too much time with it so that we do have some time for questions. I do want to reference a Dear Colleague letter we put out in 2015. It's Jan 15-12, and it walks you through all of this in pretty painful detail. So if you're interested in a quick overview, this contains almost, it doesn't talk about disclosures, but every other aspect of GE it does discuss. So I would recommend that if you wanted a review, but we'll have a brief one right here. First, I want to talk about the DE rates calculation, and we say rates calculation because there are in fact two rates associated with the metric. So we look at the discretionary income rate, and we're looking at the annual earnings rate. The difference here, as you can see, is that the discretionary income rate incorporates the poverty guideline. So the annual loan repayment, discretionary rate rather, is annual loan repayment, annual loan payment, I should say. And we're going to look at how that's calculated in a moment over the annual earnings less 1.5 times the poverty guideline. So we're going to take a look at, I'll take a look at that in a moment, but that's what separates the discretionary income from the annual earnings rate. So annual earnings rate is simply the annual loan payment over annual earnings. The poverty guideline is the poverty guideline for a family of one in the continental United States. And because the guideline reflects data from the prior year, we use the poverty guideline for the year after the earnings year so that the data will match. As an example, for the first round of calculations, we use the earnings year 2014 and the 2015 poverty guideline. The 15 poverty guideline was 11,770, so 150% of that would have been 17,655. For the next round, the round we're calculating now that Cynthia referenced earlier, we're going to use the 2015 earnings year and the 2016 poverty guidelines. So that poverty guideline is 11,880, and 150% of that would be 17,820, and that's what will be incorporated into the calculation of the discretionary income rate. So it is important to bear in mind that that there are two rates associated with the calculation. Here we have a graphic of the accountability metrics. So we've talked about calculating these two rates and what the outcomes of that calculation is and how it relates to whether or not you've passed or failed. So let's take a look at this. Under the rule, the salary data for salary data for the 2015 year and debt of graduates in the applicable cohort group. So let's take a look at this then. The slide is going to tell you the possible outcomes, and there are three possible outcomes. A program can either pass, a program can be in the zone, or a program can fail. And again, it's important to keep in mind that these are program level calculations. So an institution doesn't pass or fail. One of its programs passes or fails or is in the zone. So ideally, if we're looking here, you can see you would like to have your debt to earnings rates. If we take a look at those, we have the two rates, annual, debt to earnings annual, debt to discretionary income, the two rates we talked about in the previous slide. So ideally, with debt to earnings, you want it to be less than or equal to 8%. Because if it's less than or equal to 8%, that means you passed. So you'll see there that that you have a pass. If we go to the discretionary rate, you'll note that it's less than or equal to 20%. And it's also a pass. And under the ineligibility indicator there, we have not applicable because, of course, if you pass, you're fine. There's no applicability to ineligibility. I think it's easier to go with pass and fail and then discuss the zone. So the most unfortunate outcome, of course, would be greater than 12% for the annual rate or zero income. That would result in a fail. And if we look at the discretionary rate, that would be greater than 30% or zero income. That would result in a fail. And you can see there that if a fail occurs for 2 out of any 3 consecutive years, then that program has lost Title IV eligibility. In between the pass and fail is an area called the zone. So we can see there that, for instance, if we just take a look at annual rates, the pass would have been less than or equal to 8%. So if it's above 8%, right, but not in the fail zone, that would be greater than 12%, then we fall into the zone. So what are the ineligibility possibilities or ramifications for the zone? Well, a fail and or in the zone for 4 consecutive years would mean the program loses eligibility. So 2 opportunities to lose eligibility, 2 out of any 3 for a fail, and 4 consecutive years for fail or for any combination of fail and zone. Let's next talk about cohort periods. We talked about the metrics and what the possible outcomes are, but we now have to look at the period of time for which we do those calculations. So rates are calculated using the debt and the earnings of students who complete a GE program in a specific cohort period. We have 2 cohort periods we can use here. So a cohort period is either going to be 2 or 4 years. And we're talking about the students who complete the program in that specific period. So we're only looking, for purposes of calculating the DE rates, we're only looking at those students who complete. Now, you probably remember you report you don't just report for students who complete, but for purposes of the calculation itself, we're looking at completers. The 2-year cohort rate is going to be used if 30 or more students completed during that period. We're going to use the 4-year cohort if fewer than 30 students completed during that 2-year period. If fewer than 30 students completed during the 4-year period, there will be no DE rates calculated for that program. So those are the possibilities for the cohort. Now let's take a look at, we talked about the time frame for the cohort. I want to talk a little bit about what that would actually include, or which students that would include, and how far back we look. So the 2-year cohort is going to consist of students who completed the program in the 3rd and 4th award years prior to the award year for which the rates are calculated. So looking at the 3rd and 4th award years prior to the award year for which those rates are calculated. The 4-year cohort is going to consist of students who completed the program in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th year award years prior to the award year for which the rates are being calculated. Here we have a graphic that shows you what they are. These would be for the upcoming calculations we'll be doing now, not the previous rates which were already released, but these would be for 15-16 debt to earnings rates. Our 2-year cohort period would be award years 2011 through 2012 and 2012-2013, the 3rd and 4th years prior to the year for which we're doing the calculation. For those programs where we would apply a 4-year cohort period, you can see that it would be 2009-10, 2010-11, and 11-12, 12-13. Next, I want to talk about median loan debt. The title of the slide is calculating median loan debt, but I think it's important to point out that why are we calculating median loan debt? To give us something to do, probably? No, not for that. We're trying to get to what? What do we need in the calculation? Remember that we have to have the annual loan repayment as part of our the rate calculation, right? We have to get to annual loan repayment. Annual loan, I keep saying repayment, and it's incorrect. It's annual loan payment. So many years of talking about repayment of Title IV loans, you just get stuck in your head. So we need to get annual loan payment. How are we going to get there? We have to figure out how we arrive at that figure. So the first thing we need to do then is to calculate the median loan debt. It's our first step. The annual loan payment looks at median loan debt of program completers, and then we're going to amortize that loan debt over a specific period, 10, 15, or 20 years. We'll give a few more details about that in a moment. And we're going to amortize that using the appropriate average interest rate. And to calculate the median loan debt for each student, you take the lesser of the loan debt incurred or the total tuition, fees, books, equipment, and supplies. So we're looking at the loan debt for each student, total loan debt, but we're capping it at tuition, fees, books, equipment, and supplies, and that's because during negotiations, schools pointed out that that's the whole idea of this, or part of it was controlling costs for programs, and the only costs over which you really have direct control are tuition, fees, books, equipment, and supplies, so we are capping at that level. We do remove, if it's applicable, the appropriate number of the highest loan debts that relate to graduates that are unmatched with earnings data. So if the Social Security Administration failed to match the earnings data, then we would remove those students at the highest loan debts. In other words, giving the institution or the program the highest benefit of the doubt that we can. We then calculate the median using the remaining loan amounts. But remember again, this is all getting back to our rates calculation. Here we have an example of calculating median loan debt. And we have this nice graphic up here. We'll take a look at it. So when we talk about actual debt, we're talking about not just Title IV debt, but remember you also report institutional debt and you report private loan debt as well. So actual loan debt is the aggregate of all of those. Here, the median debt would be $25,000. Median debt for this program would be $25,000, which is indicated by the green line there over Emily. In this example, the Social Security Administration couldn't match one student, so we threw out the highest debt, and that would be the one on the red line. This doesn't occur very often because we have a fairly high match rate, but in the case where, in this case, Amy, we couldn't match the Social Security Administration, we're throwing out the highest. We couldn't do one match, so we're going to throw out the highest amount in that cohort that we're using. Okay. Let's next talk about annual loan repayment. We talked about that. That's what we're trying to get to, and the first thing we had to do to get there was to calculate that median loan debt. So we have the median loan debt. Now we're going to proceed to calculate the annual loan repayment amount. So we're going to do that using the average interest rate over a 3 or 6 year period. And that 3 or 6 year period is 3 or 6 years prior to the end of the cohort period. So we're going to use a 3-year period for programs culminating in a certificate, an associate, or a master's degree. And we're going to use a 6-year period if programs culminate in a bachelor's, doctoral, or first professional degree. Undergraduate loan level average interest rates will be calculated using federal direct unsubsidized loan interest rates for undergraduates. Graduate level programs are going to be using federal direct unsubsidized interest rates for graduate students. So for our first calculation, both the 3 and 6 year period cover a time when the graduate and undergraduate direct loan unsub loan interest rates held steady at 6.8. So the math was pretty simple in this case, 6.8% across the board. Note here that, again, we already pointed out that it includes private education loans and total amount outstanding on any other credit extended by the institution, and as we pointed out before, cap the total amount of students' tuition fees, books, and supplies, or the total amount of debt the student incurred. Generally, the total amount of debt will be greater than the than tuition fees, books, supplies, and equipment, so that's generally where the cap falls. Now, let's talk about the other item that we need to do the calculation, and that would be annual earnings. So we look at annual earnings based on earnings data. The annual earnings is the higher of the mean or median earnings that we got from the Social Security Administration for students who completed the program in the cohort period. So to protect students' privacy, the Social Security Administration only returns the mean and the median. We don't have any specific student or completer, I should say, identified. And it's only returned when the cohort group contains at least 10 completers. The earnings year used for the first round was calendar year 2014, and you can obtain the earnings data from that round by requesting the GESSA-1 report on NSLDS in the Professional Access website mode. We also posted it on the FSA Data Center. Let's next talk about corrections and challenges. There are 2 45-day periods we have to look at here. The first one, relative to corrections. Corrections follow the release of the draft completers list. So the corrections period would be once you receive that draft completers list, and you would have a chance then to correct inaccuracies in the data that you reported to us. It could be SIP codes, institutional debt figures, tuition, etc. You correct the improper inclusion or exclusion of students from that list as well during that period. The next 45-day period we have to talk about is challenges. For challenges, the burden of proof is on the institution, and we should talk about the fact that the challenges follow the actual release of GE draft DE rates. So the first one was just the corrections. That follows when the completers list comes out. Now you get the draft rates, and at that point you have an opportunity to challenge those rates. The burden of proof is on you. We don't ask for documentation up front, but you do have to maintain that documentation in case we do ask for it. For now, just know that challenges are limited to Title IV debt information only. That will be the loan period, the loan amount, and the amounts of any refunds or cancellations of Title IV debt. If you reported institutional debt incorrectly, the time to fix that was with the completers list, but you should still correct it in NSLDS. So if any institutional debt you reported, you want to fix that when you receive your completers list. What about 2015-16 DE rate calculations? They're the ones we're currently working on. They are, as Cynthia, I think, pointed out earlier, a work in progress, and the department is reviewing the school-submitted corrections right now. So schools have submitted their corrections after having received the completers list, and that is where we currently stand. That's just a brief overview of how this is calculated, and so I'm going to end there, and I think we do have time for questions, don't we, Cynthia? So, as fate would have it, right there on the question slide, what we'll do is have you come up to the microphones, and if you have any questions at that point, we'll just alter off and entertain those as we receive them. Pardon? Oh, yeah. Before we take questions, I neglected to mention something I should. That's the GE Questions mailbox. If you have questions, obviously you may ask whatever you want here, but any questions that you have that you want to send in to us can be mailed to the GE Questions mailbox. You see the place where those should be sent, the address for those. We do make every effort to get back to you as quickly as possible. We have been quite busy lately, but we do answer all of those questions, so that is the appropriate place to send those to. You also see the contact information for both Cynthia and myself. So with that, we will begin to entertain questions.
So, no. I don't see the tech guy, but can you turn on the microphones here too? Ah, he's got it. So, yeah, and encourage you to ask any questions you want to now. I will say that question mailed on the GE Questions mailbox will probably get a quicker response than doing it to either Greg or I, because we get a lot of emails. Let's start. If you'll also say what school organization you're from when you ask the question. Do you want to start, Diane?
Sure. Thanks for the presentation. My name is Diane Cheng at the Institute for College Access and Success, and my question is about the 2019 disclosure template. We're planning to submit comments, and it would be really helpful to learn more about the consumer testing that you mentioned. So I'm wondering if the department can share information about the findings, what you tested, while the comment period is still open.
So we did consumer testing on the current template that's open. I didn't mean that we did consumer testing on the new one, the one for 2019.
Right, and is that something that you can share? I assume that consumer testing informed your proposal?
Yes. I'm trying to think if the report is already on. I'm trying to remember if the report's already on our website or not. If it's not, shoot me an email and I'll try to find it and get it to you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Damien from the International Institute of Cosmetology. Yesterday was said that Social Security Administration isn't allowing you to pull the earnings data anymore. So what are you going to use for the metrics? How are you going to get the earnings data for that?
So thank you for reminding me to bring that up. So the Social Security Administration has determined that we can only use their data. They can only use their data for administering the Social Security Act. Therefore, since our regulations specifically say we'll get the data for the Social Security Administration, it doesn't say or other agency like it did in the 2010 regs. It just says that's the only one. And therefore, unless there's a change to the regulation, we cannot do another round of debt to earnings rates.
So we'd have no.
So we will not be
rates.
doing another round of debt to earnings rates at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Grand Canyon University. My question is regarding July 1st of next year, when we have to start emailing the disclosure templates to students. Is it acceptable if our system automatically sends a notice to the student that go to their portal to open up their document, the disclosure, and once they open that, that automatically feeds back into our system, indicating that the student has looked at the disclosure? We're not sending the disclosure in an email. We're sending a notice to the student to go to the portal. And that way we get an automatic notification back that the student has opened the document. Please.
Yeah, so technically that does not meet the requirement because you're not sending the notice to the student, and it has to be either hand delivered or sent to the student. Now, having the student acknowledge it by doing something within your portal system that then sends you the notice back, if you can maintain a record of that, that part of it works. Mm-hmm. But I think the email is going to have to include the information as well, and then you can say something like to acknowledge it, either reply, or you could go to the portal and do it that way.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Kelly Florian, excuse me, Bon Secours. I was asking if the department were to get rid of GE, how would they identify, like Celtic training? So how will that fold out?
So schools would still have to provide, they'd still have to add to their e-car through the e-app process, whatever their certificates are. And you'd still have to both do the certificate and what occupation, I think it asks you for which SOC code it leads to as part of that process. And so then the school would say what occupation it leads to.
Will
as
there
part
be
of
a
that
new
process.
template that would go out to students so that they can pick a program based on potential earnings or high loan debt or?
So what the department's planning to do is add earnings information to the scorecard by program. So that schools can look there and see what the potential earnings are at the, your cosmetology school versus his versus hers, and it can see if the earnings differ in some way, or it can also say, I'm only looking at your school, but I'm looking at these 3 different programs, which one has the highest earnings?
Gotcha, that makes sense, thank you.
Lissa Wayne, New York Film Academy. For those of us that are going through internal audits, our internal auditors are going to be asking us for the DE rates for the 15-16 year. Will the department publish anything, or should we submit our questions to the mailbox and wait for a reply as documentation for our internal auditors, other than just taking our word on it, that we won't be seeing these rates?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm not sure. I am not 100% sure at this point whether or not we will be putting out an electronic announcement or something letting you know that we can't do the rates. So the email, yeah, go ahead and send an email to the GE questions inbox, and you can get a response that way for now. And other than that, I mean, it's hard to prove a negative. There are no rates at this point. But yeah, send us an email and we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan Sharon, Monroe College. Just for clarification, with the delays of the disclosures and marketing till July 1 of 19, at this point in time, are there any current regulations that state in any marketing material I have to have that link to my template, or it just has to be on the program's landing page?
Currently, it's just on your program landing page.
Okay, thank you.
Colleen Russo, I'm with Educational Compliance Management. I had a client call recently with a question about the disclosure template. They were cited by their accrediting commission visit because they did not update the tuition on the template. So I just want to clarify my understanding that tuition change would not be a substantial change, like adding a new program, to where you would have to more often than annually update.
It would depend how much the tuition increased. I mean, if the tuition increased by $3, then no. But if, it was a few $100s, then yeah, that would be considered a substantial change.
It is considered a substantial change. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Chad Sartini, Virginia Western Community College. So if we delay implementation again, when might we hear about that? Or let me rephrase, when did we hear about it last time?
I can answer that question. So last time, I believe it wasn't until sometime in June before you guys heard that we were delaying the July 1st.
Can we hear sooner this time?
Greg and I will do our best. And I can't guarantee that we will delay it again. Who knows what will happen. Any other questions? If you have a gainful employment question, we'd rather hear it here than when Greg and I are up at the open forum. Yes. And you won't have to stand in lines as long to get your question asked. Of course, there's no TV cameras here, so you don't get your face on the big screens behind us, but still, come ask your question.